So in this lesson, we're going to be looking at something called the SUMIF function. And as I said earlier, the lessons XLS spreadsheet that we were using was getting overfull. We had a lot of connections that were running and everything else. So it's a good time now to create a new spreadsheet. So if you remember, file, blank spreadsheet, and then save as, and call it lessons 2 XLSX. And then rename the first tab, not create the tab because it's already there. It will be called sheet 1, but simply name it the SUMIF function. Then what I've done is I've just put some random data up here. It's got a date, and then we've got some employees' names and some expenses, fictitious expenses that they've claimed. I'm just going to bold that there, and the only thing I want to do there is I want to set that to currency. Now I have one here called accounting, and that just gives me a nice gap, and if I pull that out, what it means is the pound sign stays over on that side there. There's also a representation of the negative which changes, but we haven't got any negative values, so we don't care. So what's the criteria here? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to say we want to sum up equals SUMIF, open brackets, the range. Now our instinct is to select the range that we want to sum up, but that's not what it's asking for. It's asking for the range of the criteria. So we're going to choose this column here. Then we're going to put a comma. Now it's asking us for what is the criteria for that column. And we're going to look, notice I put speech marks, so I'm going to include text, and we're going to look for Beatrix. And the last one is the sum range. Now the square brackets implies it's optional, but in this case we're going to use it. And the sum range is the range that we want to sum up, which is this one here. So what that's basically doing is it's saying, go down this column and find the word Beatrix. If you find it, then go to this corresponding row in that group and add that up. So we should end up with 135 plus 191. So let's just close the brackets there, and we get 326, which is the sum total of those two values. We could turn that into a currency just like with the other ones we have, so if we wanted to, but it's up to us. So the SUMIF requires two other parameters, whereas the sum would simply, if I go down to here and equals sum, then if I sum those up, that will give me the sum total of everything. So the sum statement only needs to know the range in which we want to sum up. But the SUMIF has a criteria. Where is what you're looking for? What do you want me to look for? What's the column you want me to sum up if I find that value? If I find that in that column. And that's a really useful SUMIF calculation. So once we understand SUMIF and we understand criteria and range, we can then extend that to things such as SUMIF-S, which is what the next video is about. An extension of the SUMIF is the SUMIF-S, the S series. And what we've got here is I've just simply, basically, I've replicated this sheet and pulled it across. I recognize an error, by the way. I started in 2022 and then suddenly the year went backwards. So I have corrected that, and I've added a few more here, but your data doesn't need to match exactly mine. You can change anything you want to there. And I've added something called category. And that's a second criteria. And basically we're going to look at how the SUMIF-S works. And it's an extension of the SUMIF. We say equals SUMIF-S, and we've got it there. Now, it starts the other way around. It says, well, where's your sum range? And that makes sense, actually, when you come to understand how this works. So we're going to tell it, well, we want you to sum that column there. And the reason why that makes sense is because we can then just keep adding criteria, and there's no end to the criteria we can end. There undoubtedly is an end, but we're not going to meet it. So what we're going to do now is we're going to say, well, the criteria range for the first one is here, and we're going to look for the text Beatrice. That's the first criteria. But then what we're going to do is we're going to then have a look and say, well, yeah, but there's a second criteria. So you've got the second criteria range. So that's the second criteria range. and then a comma, and what's the criteria. And in this case, we're going to go for business lunches. Now you sort of typed that wrong, but let's put that back, and we can do that. So then what I can do is press enter, and that sums up Beatrice's business lunches for me. Now obviously that's going to require me to have typed in Beatrice correctly, and as you saw, I almost didn't type business lunches correctly. So again, a nice cell reference there is a much better way of working. And you can always use lists of items and things like that, because these are criteria, so we can choose those and it will work exactly the same way. So the SUMIF S allows us to have multiple criteria. I'm just going to make that currency because it's nice to do. But the SUMIF function allows us to add multiple criteria, and it looks really clever, but actually you undoubtedly understand what that is. Take this whole column here, sum up that column, but only the values where this column has Beatrix and this one has business lunches. And they, first of all, Beatrix overrules this one. So it's not all business lunches. It's simply saying where Beatrix is and is business lunches. So that should be the one which is basically 191 plus 230, and 191 plus 230 undoubtedly gives us 421. Just in case you're wondering if it doesn't, then equals 191, that's Beatrice's business lunches there, plus the 230 there, and 421. I was a bit nervous there in case it didn't come up, but obviously it was going to. And that would have been fun. So what we've got is that ability to do that calculation. Now the question is, why don't I just do what I did? Well, because we're only working with a very small sample of data. It's just a test. But imagine if you've got thousands of these. Then that simple SUMIF S will save you a lot of work, a lot of effort. You won't have to do what we've just done here. That simple calculation can apply to an entire range. And remember, I've done this, by the way. I didn't need to do that. I could have simply clicked on the D at the top and said, well, just that one. I didn't have to do this one. I could have said, well, no, I'll tell you what, instead of doing that, just look in that column. And same with the C3, I could have C2 to C13. I could have said, no, just look in that entire column there. If I then press enter, I still get the same calculation. Using the columns has made that a lot neater. It's possibly a bit harder to read, but actually I don't think it is. And the only things that have got a row reference is the fact that I've connected the B3 and C6. And if I use the list, I could pull that list out of there and then use that, and I could then just select the name and the category, and it would give me the outcome, which we'll be using much later on. So that's the SUMIF S. Now, one of the things I'd like to then look at is the use of text. But before we do that, we're just going to, in the next video, look at how we can interrogate this date field a little bit further and use that information effectively. Then we can look at the text. So see you in the next video when we're going to learn about these dates. See you then.